everyone, and welcome to the Koala Club podcast, a podcast made by and for international students in Australia. I am Kevin.
And I am Trang, and we talk about everything education, work, and lifestyle for overseas students in Australia. Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of the Koala Club podcast. Hello Kevin, how are you?
I'm good, Chang. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, so Chang, what do we have today?
Well, today we are going to delve a little bit further into what life is like as a PhD student and also get some bonus resume and interview tips from a very special guest speaker who is a close friend of mine. So we've got Paul here with us. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks. Hi. Great to be on the show.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for accepting our invitation to come on the podcast. And we're very excited, when we first heard that you would accept our invite, which is because we have always wanted to talk to someone who's like in the PhD life. And I think you are very suited for that. And you must have a lot of experience as well in the HR industry and as a HR manager as well. So, that is two areas that is of very high interest for, and I think will benefit the international students community very much. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think I listened to your previous episode with Trish from UOW. So that was, I think I was stuck to my radio listening to that. So I think, looking forward to this one. I think it should be fun.
Yeah, so are we. So Paul, why don't you give us a quick intro on yourself and more details on what you're studying and your current job?
Yeah, so in terms of myself, so I'm also an international student, but I've been in Australia since 2015. So I came to Australia to do my master's in business, human resource management, and general management. So that's a double major at the University of Wollongong. And prior to that, so I am from Nigeria. So I'd worked in Nigeria for about 4 years or so. And I have a bachelor's degree in economics. And that's why I did my first bachelor's degree back in Nigeria. Came to Australia in 2015. And during the course of my master's degree, as all things international students, did lots of side jobs, from popular hospitality, worked at the Wynn Stadium in Wollongong, worked at a fine dining restaurant, had a job at the University of Wollongong as a student services support officer. So did that for about 2 years. And then finally, after my master's degree in 2017, I got my first role in HR because in Nigeria, my previous role was in customer relations. So I was in the telecommunications industry in Nigeria. So that was the transition to go from that to human resources. I got my first role in 2017 with a real estate company. And been there ever since as HR manager. And so that's the job side of the fence. On the PhD side, so I worked for about 2 years, and in 2019 I decided to come back to uni because I missed it so much, and picked up a PhD in disability employment, and that's what I'm doing now, and hope to finish that soon and go back to full-time work in my normal HR role.
Yeah, wow, that's very impressive, and it's a very comprehensive summary of, I would say, your achievements, because it is like a variety of roles you have been, and even the part-time and casual roles when you were studying in uni, right? I can see because you got a nice range from working in normal hospitality to fine dining to student support role. So all of that must have taught you a lot of skills and experience, working with different group of people, and also must have taught you about management skills, which you may apply now for your current job. So do you feel like through all that time that you learned so much from all the jobs? And what are some, maybe can you share with us a couple of valuable lessons that you think you learned from those years?
Yeah, I think it's funny how you always hear this thing growing up where they say no experience is wasted. But I think you never really grasp the full depth of that statement until when you've actually had many experiences, then you kind of see how those experiences play into your present. In my case, lots of experiences. For example, as simple as working in a restaurant as a wait staff or kitchen hand. When you see the process that goes into that behind the scene of getting food ready, what dedication it takes, how intense the kitchen environment is, it gives you a very different appreciation when you actually go to a restaurant and you become like a nicer person to kind of go, been there, done that, kind of know he's smiling, but probably his chef isn't smiling and stuff like that. And, I think in my professional career, currently I'm in HR, but once upon a time I was a regular employee. And I think that was one of the driving factors, I suppose, that made me switch to HR. I remember, I think around 2013, I had a conversation with the HR officer where I used to work. And I think the answer to the question I asked was quite disappointing. And I think based on that, you kind of go, there has to be a better way to do this, and you kind of take that experience with you, that the way you felt as an employee, when you become a HR person, you kind of want to go, okay, I don't want someone else to feel the same way. So maybe I should approach it a different way. So I think my experience is by not going straight into HR, but just doing other things, kind of gives me a bit more holistic sense of what it's like to be on both sides of the fence. So yes, experiences, none of them is wasted. So.
Yeah, that's super cool. And yeah, like how Kevin mentioned, like you worked a variety of roles, but in some ways it all, because you experienced all that work and you're dealing with people, and that sort of shapes who you are now as HR manager, and you've all channeled it into this this experience that you're currently doing now. And I think it's also super cool that you were working and then you did your master's and then you went back to working, and then now you're jumping back into studying your PhD. So other than you missing uni and that, what were the other factors that led you into doing this PhD?
Well, I think being that this is a platform, I guess that's, positioned uniquely to service, I guess, international students. One of the big things that every international student has to confront is the visa conversation. And you kind of, you have to be very objective about that. So I think in my case, prior to coming to Australia, I kind of had like a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, so that because it's a big decision moving. So you want to have multiple options to say, if your perfect scenario is, you finish your master's degree, straight away you get your permanent residency, straight away you get your next one, then you go. But then that doesn't happen most of the time. So you want to have other options. So for me, you can call the PhD my plan D in that situation, because in my case, I knew that if I did the master's for 2 years, I had the post-study work visa, which was another 2 years, which in that time, the plan was get a job in HR. Probably during that 2-year period, you're either eligible for a skills migration visa or you get a sponsorship visa from your workplace, different. And I guess in my case, plan C was to relocate to a part of Australia that basically would welcome you open arms, which I wasn't ready to do plan C because I was already comfortable in Wollongong. So I guess after working for the 2 years at my current job, I kind of made the call to kind of go, okay, I like what I'm doing. I like the location I'm at. You know, the girlfriend's in the same location as well. It's a bit too disruptive to look at moving locations. So Plan D came back. Like I had a booklet from 2015 where I already had all these plans. And I kind of went, well, if all things fail, this is the last option. And it came down to that, the last option. But, you know, it helps that I was passionate about learning in the first instance. It wasn't just about, you know, means to an end, but I also had that in mind. I always had a plan to do a PhD. However, a combination of factors made that plan become a reality way earlier than I thought it would become a reality. So I guess in that sense, that was the key driver for that. But yeah, there's no regrets and I'm enjoying the experience. And yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up in a PhD, objectively speaking.
Well, that's great. What I learned in life, you never know what's going to happen, where your plan A or your plan D is going to happen. But I think what's good about you is at least you have those plans. You know what I mean? Like, you know, there's going to be uncertainties, but at least you prepare those plans, even 2 or 3 plans. And I think that is a crucial aspect that international students, most of us should do. Like, we know that we should enjoy life as it is. And especially when you're young and you're international student, you probably don't want to think about the future very much. But I think to have plans like that, like what you do, help you enjoy life more. And then when you face your uncertainties, at least you have some sort of guidance on what you should do next. And which lead me to your current plan now, right? You studying PhD. So I'm always very curious on life as a PhD student because I myself at my last year in bachelor degree I did a thesis which only lasted for 1 year, and I kind of live as a semi PhD student because I just do research and go to the lab and all the like submerge myself in that and all that pressure, all nighter, all that sort of stuff. And I was so close at doing a PhD, but at the very last minute, I turned it down and tried to get a job outside in the industry. So that the PhD war is always to me always like one step away, and I always very curious on what is this. I see my friends doing PhD a lot, but to hear firsthand from someone who's lived in that war would be another experience. So can you share with us a little bit about your life as a PhD student, both like academically and also in your daily life? What that affect you?
Yeah, so I think on the academic side, it's different because the PhD is like a continuum. You have a starting point where everything is, very vague. It's still vague, but it's not as vague as before, because you're starting from empty glass to hopefully almost full glass. But I think that on an academic side, the first thing is you go into, for me, I went into a PhD with a desire to, I guess, learn something. Apart from the practical bits, I wanted to also learn something new. And that's the idea. But the other thing is you don't only learn something new about a research area, you also learn your limits as a person. Because to be honest, it tests you like a lot of time. Like you to test every fiber of your being to kind of go, there are days when you kind of, think, what the hell am I doing to myself? Why did I sign up for this? Like, this is a nightmare. And then you have like these days when you kind of, you've learned something new that maybe for the last 2 months has been a pain in the neck. Then you finally just learn the thing could just be a word. And you then go, wow, Nobel Peace Prize, I've achieved it, done it. And that circle keeps going again and again and again. So that's like the life of a PhD student is, I think for me, it's like, it's not a genius. You don't have to be a genius to do it. I think it's more like a resilience test, like grit. You have to keep showing up every day. Just, every day your supervisor's life, your research is going to keep smacking you in the face, but you're just going to keep coming back, taking it. The first year, you cry. The second year, you kind of go, part of life, you still cry. The third year, you kind of go, you cry a lot, but you're like, okay, I need to get out of this thing. So that's on the academic bit. Personal life wise, I think it's just one of those, I treat the PhD like a job. So I was working full time in my role as HR manager. Once the PhD came on, I went to part-time for work, because regardless of whether you're receiving, a scholarship like I am, whether it's a funded project, a stipend is not going to sustain your lifestyle. So I think you still have to balance. So some of my PhD colleagues teach. I don't teach. I do my HR role, which is what, my employer was happy for me to drop down to that capacity, but I have to have systems. So it's kind of a situation where even though I'm working 1 day a week at my actual role as manager, I still have to almost put in this continuous cycle of overtimes where you kind of just go above and beyond, because if you don't do it, those gaps become visible and then things happen. So there's a lot of, I think from personal side, a lot of planning to balance the work life, the personal life, the relationship side of the fence. That's a pain point, of course, because, everybody wants a piece of your time, but there's only so many hours in a day. So that's just how it's a continuous juggling act, but we're still here. So that's all I can, push there.
Yeah, it does sound like you have a lot on and you're juggling everything at the same time. And now that you mention it, like if you're a normal, like a student, you would have your personal life and your study life if you're just studying, but then you're doing a PhD, so you're studying, you're also working, and then you've also got your personal life to juggle. So it's quite amazing hearing that from you. And you touched on scholarships, so I do want to hear more on that. But however, before we move on to that, I also want to ask you, because you mentioned you're doing your topic of your PhD is on disability employment. I'm curious to hear what led you to picking that topic, and can you tell us a little bit more about that topic?
Yeah, so I think my professional background is in HR. So one of the key things I think before you start a PhD is you have to have an idea of the area you want to do your research in. It may not be exactly what you want. So I think thinking back, my original intention, because I think from the master's I had, great academics that always kind of said, oh, you should do a PhD, you should do a PhD. And I'm like, get away from me, get away from me. And you then get to this point where you want to do the PhD. Then the first exercise I think I was given was, what do you want to do in your PhD? And for me, it was something to do, I wanted to do something that was relevant to me as a person. So, which for me, and if you're passionate about HR, inclusion is a big thing in that field. So inclusion was big. I didn't really care if it was migrants, if it was people with disability, if it were LGBTIQ, basically just the subject of inclusion, participation, having a voice in work decisions was a big passion for me. As fate would have it, around the same time that I was, trying to pick a PhD topic, I always said to myself that, wouldn't it be great if there was this fantastic project that just jumped out of nowhere and was exactly in the area I wanted, and I didn't have to crack my brain designing the whole thing from scratch. And what do you know? One of my potential supervisors said, oh, I just saw an ad about this government-funded PhD project that looked at people with disabilities and employment, and the brief of the scholarship specifically asks for someone with HR background. So it's like all my docs just lined up, and I'm like,
Oh, wow.
Awesome. I should probably put my hand up for this one. But I think what was also interesting was in my master's degree, because at the end of the 2 years Master of Business, you have to do a capstone project, which is almost like a mini report where you have to go and interview people and stuff. And for the year that I was doing my capstone project, the problem was basically to help a disability provider, support provider, which is one of the local ones here, Green Acres, to solve a volunteering issue. So in a sense, that kind of brought me for the first time in contact with disability. And I think doing that, so I remember when I went to the interview for the, with the panel, and they said, oh, it's great you have HR background, you have this background. What background do you have with disabilities? And I said, well, I haven't worked there, but I have done this project on it, which I'm happy to share with you, which they looked at and they said, great, ticks all our boxes. And we don't have to train you about this area anymore. And yeah, so that's how I got that one. And, it kind of worked out really well that there was a project, it was funded. I didn't have to fight, tooth and nail like most people seeking scholarships. It was already there. So it was almost like I went to interview for a job and I got the job, which is why I said at the start, I treat the PhD as a job, because in reality, that's actually what it is. There's a time frame, there's funding for it, and I have to be done by a certain period of time. So that's my own story with how the scholarship came about.
Okay,
That's
so
great.
the scholarship you got was from the government, and it's in relation to that particular project. So it's not like the AusAid or other types of PhD scholarships that we hear about.
No. So in my case, my supervisor, there's something that's called an Australian Research Council grant. So academics generally are encouraged to apply for that in Australia. My supervisor, exceptional at applying for these kinds of funding, was successful. So it's a big project that has about, it's a project that has academics with varied expertise from both University of Queensland, University of Wollongong, has a government department involved as a part sponsor of the project as well. And yeah, so part of the deliverables of that project is that there will be 2 PhD students. And I was lucky or fortunate to get one of those spots. So in a sense, I have, access to some really brilliant people that have all these resources and stuff. Doesn't make the journey less challenging, but as they say, it's better to cry in a limousine than to cry under the hot sun on your foot. So put it that way.
A very good metaphor. And I'm sure, when you have a project, a stable funding, it's give you more peace of mind to be more creative and more dedicated as well. You mentioned that you still working part-time in the very industry that you are researching for, which is HR manager. So from your experience for both worlds, as a PhD and as a normal worker, which one do you think is a better option for PhD students, the academic side or the industry career?
I think speaking for myself, because this is an answer, it's like you'd ask 100 people, you get 100 different variations of the answer. I think in my case, like I said, the PhD was always for me a plan D. And the objective was always to learn. It wasn't for me to go and find a new career path or anything. I wasn't sick of HR. I was actually I'm still passionate and excited about HR, even though I work 1 day a week now, but I go to work with the same excitement that, okay, there's probably a new problem. What do we, fix in this place and stuff? So there's that excitement for me. So I'm still there. So for me personally, the end goal has never been to go to academia. It has always been industry. That's where my mind has always been. I think personally, it takes a special kind of person to be in academics, to teach, setting KPIs around publications, teaching, getting grants and things like that. Whereas the industry bit is kind of, I guess, more specialized in that sense. So I think for me, I've always been drawn to the industry side, but I have lots of colleagues that, they went into the PhD, to go in that form. And I think part of the reason for my, inclination to go back to industry is because I didn't have what some PhD students have, which is finish a bachelor degree straight into a master's degree, straight into a PhD. And you never have a feel for, the practical work environment. In my case, I had a bachelor degree, I had 3 years of practical, I had a master's degree, I have 2 years of practical, and I have a PhD again. So in that sense, I've always been fascinated by working out in the field. But like I said, you never know what happens in a couple of years' time. I think when you get the PhD, it's something you have, it's yours. If you want to teach in one day when, I'm tired of industry, I can always go back to it. But at the moment, industry is where I'm heading towards, is to go back.
That's really interesting to hear, Paul. So now moving on to more of the work side. So you're a HR manager. So is there a typical day in the life of a HR manager? Or if not, then can you sort of describe what you do in your role?
Well, put it this way. A typical day is an unpredictable day. So most of the time for me, I go to work and my calendar probably has 4 meetings in it, but those 4 meetings quickly multiply into 5 official meetings or 6 official meetings and 4 unofficial meetings, where I'm kind of like walking down and the director pulls me and, oh, come in, I need to talk to you about something. And that becomes like its own, subset of meetings again. But in terms of what, if I, could summarize what a typical day for me is at work, is basically get into work, try to go through your emails as quickly as possible to see what's actually in there and see which one requires urgent attention or which one do you prioritize for later. Meetings are a big part of it because part of my role as HR manager, apart from what some people call the mundane functions of HR, which is kind of like recruitment, interviewing, things like that, a big part is culture. So to make sure that the culture of the workplace is positive and that people actually want to come to work. Sounds like a very short statement, but it's a very loaded gun because when morale nosedives, a lot of things just happen that no one expects, and that ripple effect goes on. So I think just being switched on for that to kind of like almost check in with every manager to go, oh yeah, how's your week been? How's your department going? What's new? Anything I should be worried about or excited about and stuff like that. So that's one of the things, kind of like almost being a sonar in the workplace to like open my ears and like, what's wrong? What's happening? Who's happy? Who's not happy? I have this thing that I say at work, which is kind of like, if the vibe is negative, overwhelm the negative with positive. So if you get into my office, you kind of find out I'm the loudest person in the workplace because and everyone goes, oh, you have way too much energy today. And I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to see you. It's like stuff like that. And, just like a playground kid. But the idea is kind of like to, get everyone to not focus on the upsetting side of their jobs and just notice this, I won't say clown, but this person on the side that is kind of like, just making this noise on the side. For the other things I do is to coach. So coach managers. So it's to kind of coach managers to kind of go, okay, if this happens in your department, what's the best way to respond to it? Because one of the big things about my role as manager is risk mitigation as well, especially from the employment side of it. So by risk mitigation, I mean something like, if there is a performance drop from staff, and the manager knows there's a drop, and the manager has identified the individuals that are responsible for the drop. Then a delicate dance in terms of what's the best way to tell this person that the performance has dropped, because you could tell the person in one way and the person explodes. And so kind of coaching managers around what's the best way to have that conversation, what's the best sequence if things go south, what's the safety net that I can go with. That's another part. The other bit, which is also important, is to, be the, I hate to use this expression, but the devil's advocate in the office, where it's, if everybody is happy or feels good about something, then it's almost like I have to play the role of throwing some ice block on everyone and go, have you thought about this? Then it's like party pooper kind of thing, but to make everyone kind of think twice about why. And that's one of the big things that my directors want me to do. Is kind of like for every, I guess, step that they want to take, to look for holes in those steps, where until we get to a point where there is no doubt about the step, then we take the step. So that's another thing. So I think in that, those are like the key parts, but yeah, culture, making sure the engine ticks. And at the same time, I always like to say the role of a HR manager is to help management create the right environment for their staff to perform their best. So my role is not to help to do other people's jobs, because I can't do it. I'm working real estate, but I can't sell any property. But I have to always try to create the right environment with the help of their managers to make sure that the staff are in the right headspace to do their best work. Because in that way, if they do well, the company does well, I still have a job, which is fantastic to do that. But yeah, but that's a day in the life of a HR manager in my instance.
That is very refreshing to hear for me, because I haven't been working for so long, maybe it's about 6 years, but in my probably first 4 years, I encounter mostly, I think, would be bad HR managers. And I think that's create a myth as well. Like I always believe in that myth, that is HR manager are there to protect the company interest and would probably just put the employees to the second or probably the last. And in my personal, I hate to say it, but personally, I experience some very bad HR manager ways, mostly like their way or the highway. Now looking back, very refreshing what you just say about, even if you got a bad performing or just a drop in performance of an employee, how to actually break it out to them is actually an art in itself. Because in the way that myth of bad HR manager or very tough HR manager, the thing is that create high retention, or not high retention, but like a high turnover rate when employees just leave or get fired. And it costs so much in money and time to retrain someone new, right? And also the morale of the whole team goes down as well, because you see people leaving. So I think that is very refreshing and very true what you just said. It has to work both ways, and it's so good to see that there are HR managers out there, and probably a lot too, like you yourself, who care about both ways and care about a lot about the employees as well.
Yeah, and I think I'll just probably add, I think the stereotypes are still there. Like I still have to play with the same. I remember when I got into my workplace, I was the first HR manager or HR professional in the workplace. And the first roadblock was basically, how do I get the trust of everyone to kind of like, look, I'm not here to shoot you guys. Like I'm here to actually help you guys be better. And I think that process probably took the better part of 2 years to kind of like get through the first wave of, defense from everyone, to kind of emphasize that, look, my role is this. I can't change what my role is. Like I was hired by a board of directors. What I can do from my side is basically to advise them on the best way to run their workplace in terms of the people in it. Because you can look at it this way, is if I keep quiet about a situation, the workplace becomes very toxic. No one wants to come to work. Like you said, the turnover shoots up. No one wins in that case because you still have to go and replace. I think we have an expression in HR where we say, for every role that you have to replace, it's actually cost you 4 times to get that role back to the level of someone that you retain, because you still have, or even if the person comes with 25 years of experience, there's still a transition period, a 3 months, 6 months period where they have to learn the new culture and they would never perform their best. So from my end, I kind of go and I have to communicate this to all my managers and directors and train them as well to kind of almost become mini HR people, to kind of go, look, if this person leaves and I give them, because my directors like numbers, it's very hard to quantify feelings sometimes, but you develop ways of kind of showing them this is the equivalent of this to go. But I think that's how I look at it. It's kind of like, yes, I work for the directors, and if the directors decide, all right, I don't want this person here, my role, and I think it's the role of most people in management position, is to then paint or do a cost-benefit analysis and show them and go, look, no one is stopping you from taking this road, but these are the potential things that will happen when you take that road. So if you take the road that is unfair to your employees, you may have increase in turnover, you may have people picking up more fights in the workplace, things like that. If you take the other road, we could mitigate this risk and still get to the outcome, but it's not as aggressive. So I think that's my role, is then to almost, present them with a business case to go. I always say to my directors at work, I say, I am never going to help you make a decision. All I can do is give you information and you do whatever you want to do, because if you make the decision, in that case, I'm taking myself. My role is not to help you manage in terms of make those decisions. My role is to support you in making those decisions by giving you the risk with every decision, the benefits as much as I know, as much as my experience and resources can flag it. So in the same way you would trust a salesman to be the person selling your house, that's the same way I would pitch myself as a HR manager to go, this is my field. Trust me, you wouldn't go to a mechanic to treat your medical condition. Like, I'm your doctor in this field, so trust me in this area and stuff like that. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, it's really eye-opening to hear you describe your role, because I think, yeah, as Kevin mentioned, non-HR employees would think, oh, HR is very solely focused on recruitment and interviewing and getting candidates in the door, but there's so much more to HR, and it's incredible to hear you describe like the coaching, the mentoring you do, and managing those relationships and managing the stakeholders. And I think that's why, and correct me if I'm wrong, because now more HR roles are being, the role is being titled people and culture rather than HR, because it's moving towards like how people and culture is so important to the workplace. And is that something that's like a trend moving in that direction, Paul? Like HR is being branded as people and culture, and that's what people's titles are now in human resources.
Yeah, so once upon a time, there wasn't even a thing called HR. It was called personnel management. And that was what it was called, because it was basically a numbers game, is get X number of employees in, get X number of employees out, replace them, and you keep going. And I think over time, the field, just like any field, develops, evolves, becomes more specialized. So once upon a time, you had a focus that was more of a generalist focused, which is kind of, you do the HR or the personnel management professional would do payroll, the person would do recruitment, would do culture, would do employee relations, hiring, firing, advising, coaching, you do all that. But then as the workplace gets more complex, you then start having more specializations. So you have, for example, an industrial relations specialist if it's in an organization that has lots of unions in it. You want someone that actually understands the way unions work and can tie that to a workplace. You have workplaces that have people that are just purely on recruitment because they have so much, I guess, turnover, whether as a result of staff leaving or just by rapid growth of the company. And they have to almost hire on a constant basis. So you have those professionals. You have, like you said, people in culture, which their function is to focus on the people side of the fence and the culture side of the workplace. Because I'm a big believer of the idea that, the culture underpins everything. The culture would inform who stays. The culture would self-select people that stay in an organization. If your culture is toxic, you will attract toxic people and they will stay. But if your culture is one that, reflects caring, that holds people accountable, and that's how I try to create in my own situation, is to have a culture that everyone's accountable, that you can hold your manager accountable for an outcome, and at the same time, your manager can hold you for an outcome. So like the name goes, it's just different. It's different. It's based on the focus. If the organization is really intentional that, okay, we want to have a fantastic culture, they could give it the name of people and culture manager or professional. I think I heard of one the other day for a different field, which is a reception at a workplace, and they called it director of first impressions. So just to make it feel like, okay, this is how you contribute to the bigger picture, and to do it rather than using the stale HR manager and stuff. So it's different for every organization and how they approach titles. In my case, it doesn't really matter. The work is the work. We know what needs to be done. If you like, call it president of people and whatever, the job is still the job. So.
Oh, love it, Paul. So I guess moving on now to, the more traditional tasks of HR or people and culture, and inevitable in organizations. So you need to be recruiting new staff. So one thing that I would love to hear, and I'm sure Kevin would love to hear, and definitely our listeners too, and would be very useful for them to hear from your perspective, is resumes and interviews. So can you share with us some resume writing tips, and also what do employers look for when they're screening candidates' resumes? Because any job could get 50 to 100 or even more applicants. So how do you screen through those?
So I think I'll start from, I guess, the resume writing bit. Is there are two parts to every job ad. The first bit is basically the minimum requirement, that you actually look at what is actually required, listen to the question or read the question. Some ads say, if you think this job is right for you or you feel you fit in here, send a CV and a cover letter to Mr. XYXYZ. And then you would get people sending just the CV and not the cover letter. In a situation where you have 200 applicants, that's the first thing I'm using to cut that size down. It's kind of like, all right, who hasn't done the minimum requirement? Out, 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 out. Because in that case, I have lots of options, right? So the minimum requirement is a big thing. The other one is, I think there's this, one of the first things I learned in HR is that I think for people, job applicants, they have this view that the HR person has all the time in the world to read the whole resume. But I think the first rule that I kind of learned in HR is that on average, especially in a busy workplace, it's 5 seconds.
Wow.
5 seconds to basically just look at that resume and just go, okay, does it speak to me? No, move on. Or, that's interesting. Then, because it's kind of like, and I do something similar in the research as well, where you have so many, papers, but then you want to be able to just look at a quick snapshot, which is why most papers would say abstract. So your resume is kind of like your postcard, where you kind of go, even if your resume, and I have this strict rule for any of my, friends and stuff, I say, limit it to 2 pages. Like, I don't know how you do it, but get it down to 2 pages. Like, our lives are full of experiences, but not every experience is worth sharing for the job. So, if you treat your resume as a postcard, you want to make sure the first page of that resume should answer the question, what excites me about me? Like, what do I want you to know? Is it that, I've accomplished this degree? Or is it that, I've worked here, or I have this experience? So I get people that write things like, in their resume that would go, write this long brief on the resume that goes, I am this, dedicated to be this, want to be president, want to be Nobel Peace Prize, all that, X, Y, X, Y, Z, and that's already like half the page. Then at the bottom, you have the next, which is like experiences, and it's one row that's first. And I'm like already tired. So you kind of skip. So in that case, you want to make sure you hit, you kind of go straight that this is what you want, and you put that up first. So that's the resume bit. The resume bit, you have to make sure the resume is relevant to the job. Now, some people are notorious for circulating the same resume everywhere, but the truth of the matter is you always look for resumes that speak to the role, that actually, if you have an experience, so I may have been a chef in my previous life, but I'm applying for the role of, say, a business analyst in real estate. Yet someone's resume would have experience, chef, 20 years. And I'm like, what's the relationship between the role and being a chef? I think as an applicant, you have to make that decision as to which experience or which qualification speaks to the role and do that. That's resume. Cover letter is another one that I think is interesting. So for most people, like I said earlier on, there's the minimum requirement. If a cover letter is requested, provide that. But then if I look at your resume and your resume speaks to me and I take an interest in it, then the next thing that happens is I want to know more. Your cover letter is where I get that information of more. So you almost have to be good at summarizing yourself, and cover letters that go more than a page, you're just, that's a bit too much. Just try to keep it to a page that basically hits the notes. You're not repeating what's in your resume, but rather you're highlighting the key properties in your resume. If you've had 20 job experiences, but then you want to emphasize that, okay, I've worked for a fortune like Google or something. In my cover letter, I would brag and go, I'm a fit for this role because I have XYZ experience and I've worked here doing this from here to here. Because then I'm kind of going, wow, I want to talk to this person now because now they've, got me all curious about them. So I think it's very important that the resume is not just circulated everywhere without thinking about it. And in the same vein, that the cover letter is not doing the exact same thing, because people also send the same cover letter and they try to be smart by going to say to the hiring manager, I would like to apply for the role that was advertised on this place and stuff,
very template-y.
Yeah, we kind of go and go, oh yeah, this person is not even working hard. Like, show me you worked for this and stuff. So yeah. So I think that's the tip. I think in terms of resume, cover letter, those two, that's my top tip, to take time to actually get it right. Because someone that's experienced in hiring, especially HR people that have a nose for these things, they can almost sniff it once they see certain patterns, because everyone in that same behavior repeats the same things. And yeah, so that's like my tip there. Take time to do it well. If you're going to apply properly, and hope for the best after that.
Yeah,
Mm.
very true. Like you need to actually put effort into it, and like you said, go straight to the point. I always remember a few years ago I was working in Sydney in construction, and I remember my construction manager was sitting down in a table in the office reviewing resumes for a labor job, so just a casual labor, and there must be 200 of them on his hand. I was like, oh, okay, or go get some paper. I print out something for him. I come back 5 minutes later and he's already finished. I was like, what, do you read that? And he said, yeah. And it literally 2 seconds flick. So like you said, they can, and that's just a construction manager with experience. That's not even a HR manager, right? So like you said, they can almost sniff out, the nonsense people put in that's not sincere and not genuine, right? So like you said, work
Right.
on it and be genuine, be sincere, and show that you actually want this job and why you're the right fit, not just like I just throw my resume out there for whatever job I can get.
I think that
Um,
one of the most hilarious things I see is where you have in the selection criteria, you have this popular one, which is a classic, attention to detail. Then you read the resume and the cover letter, you see typos or and you kind of go, well, if attention to detail is to meet social criteria, and this person is applying for the job of, say, an accountant, then my payroll is in trouble. So stuff like that. So I think just taking time, like you said.
Yeah, and it's cliche stuff that you hear all the time, right? But you can't emphasize it enough for people to check for typos, check for grammar, check for spelling, address it properly to the right employer you're sending it to, and don't send just one template to 10 employers, because it's quality over quantity, right? You're better to spend time refining a resume to send to 2 good employers rather than just send a crappy one to 10.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and that reminds me of another funny story. When I was recruiting and I saw this phrase that was really familiar, and I was like, I swear I've seen this phrase somewhere. So then I flicked through to another applicant and found that exact same phrase. So it must be something straight from Google, which is so bad.
Yep. I think there's only so many ways you can skin a cow. Like, at some point, if you're gonna keep checking Google for the way things are written and stuff, like there's, especially if you're a hiring manager, even in HR, you would have come across so many resumes that patterns start to emerge, and you kind of go, seen this somewhere before. And the funny thing is, now with the with systems in place like human resource integrated systems, these systems actually track applicants. And if an applicant applies and maybe they've done something dodgy in the application, that already sits in the record. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've noticed where sometimes people you may apply for a job, and one of the questions is, have you ever applied for a position here before? And some people may go, nope, even when they have. But then the system just flags it and shows date, time, when, history, email, and so things like that. I think you just have to be genuine about the application. Better, like you said, better to apply to 2 that you really care about and do this massive blast of applications to many roles at the same time.
Another also really important area, and we talked about this. Was it our last episode? Yeah, Chang, our last episode is it essential to have good marks in order to secure a job after your graduation? So we have a good chat about this in the last episode, and we have like mixed discussions. The episode's not out yet, so if you want to hear our for Paul, not for our listener, but for Paul, if you want to hear, you have to go back to listen later. But right now, we want to hear your opinion. What do you think about this statement? Is it essential or not to have good marks in order to secure a job after graduation?
So this is a very interesting one, because every job is different, right? Every field is different. If you're in medicine, and if you're in medicine, that I know to a large extent, the marks is an indication because there's a lot of practicals in that, then in that case, I'm very interested in the practical bit, right? If you're in construction, how are you going to look for marks in construction? Like, unless maybe the person went to a technical college. So to a large extent, it's 50-50. Like you would see if you actually check some of the, most successful managers and stuff, some of them may not have, a university degree, but they may have also started from the bottom of a company and worked their way up. So they've accumulated X number of years. That's why you may see some job adverts that would say 5 years experience or, X number of years or X qualifications and stuff. So it's a 50-50 thing in that regard. I know some companies prioritize experience above qualifications. Like that's like, for them, it's like and to be fair, sometimes fresh university graduates or college graduates may apply for roles, and the first stumbling block, it's almost like a catch-22. It's kind of like, oh, great, you have education but no experience. Then you're going to have experience. They go, oh, you don't have education, so and it's stuff like that. In the Australian context, Australia, and every country is different. In Australia specifically, there's a big premium placed on experience, that you can demonstrate that you can get the job done. So I think my advice in that argument, and I could probably use my own experience when I was trying to get into my HR role for the first time. I went into the master's program with the mindset that, look, I'm going to probably try to get the best marks that I possibly can, right? Because probably going to be a plus rather than a minus. So I'll probably go in to the degree with this almost insatiable hunger to get the best marks possible, but also with this mindset as well that I have to be able to sell that qualification. So I remember in my first conversation, it's still clear to me, even the date, 16 October 2017, I still remember, because that conversation with my former director was such that I knew some of the other people I was competing with for the role, people that had 7 years experience, right? In my case, I had never worked in HR, but I knew as well that I've also done all these other things, like other industries I've done that were not HR, but I've had other experiences. And I went into that interview conversation basically saying, oh, look at me. I was not in these exact words, but kind of almost saying, in terms of theory and best practice, I have been taught by the best in this area. I've studied, and these are the, this is the evidence to show that I was the best in this field. In terms of experience, I don't have specific experience in this role, but if you give me a problem, I will tell you how I would address that problem based on the theory that I've actually learned. So my interview was kind of one of problem solving, where they kind of go, okay, these are the problems we want to solve. How would you deal with it? And I kind of go, well, best practice wise, I would go in this way. And I would tie in my life experiences as being on the other side of that table and link that in to make a coherent argument to say, I may not have experience, but I'm aware enough to know that on the theory side, I'm solid and I can actually demonstrate. So, and that's the thing. I think the education argument is that if anyone that's studying, study hard, give it your best. Because for you, it's a case of once you finish studying, if you can tie in some experiences there, internships, fantastic, because that's your experience. You can say, I've had this experience. And when you then go for the job you actually want, you can then basically make that case that, oh, I've done these practicals, or I've done this, project or teamwork, and demonstrate those values and stuff. Because when you work, I think once you get your first job, within the first 3 months, that's like your ticket to any other job. that degree can access, because you kind of go, well, I have 3 months here, I can apply for anyone, and the experience just keeps going up. Whereas the reverse is the case, where you have people with experience, and then they get to a point, because I think the pitfall with experience is that you have lots of experience, but if you're not continuously learning, you become stale. So in a sense, even if you don't do a degree, but you should be doing some mini courses or something to actually show that, oh, I may not have a master's degree, but I'm continuously doing this course or learning this or learning this. So that's where your experience, you can buffer that with some of these courses. Whereas the education bit, you have to do the same, where if you have the degree, you have to do some practical bits. In my case, I went for a role that I knew was well below my qualifications, right? But the aim for me was to get experience in that field, even if it was for 3 months. But then 5 years later, I'm still in the same role, like, higher up in the role, but that was how I got in. So I think that's my long take to that answer.
Very interesting.
It's amazing to hear Paul's perspective, and I guess we came up with a very similar answer, but not as like deep as Paul's. So no, it was really.
I ramble a lot.
No,
Yes,
it was
from
very from the
yes,
professional himself.
exactly.
So
It's very details.
yeah, we'll just snip that bit and then add it to the episode.
Should we even release that?
Just
That
release
was a
Paul's
refreshing,
answer. That's
yeah.
all. So once the resume stage is done, so next is the interview. So do you have some tips that you could give job seekers as to how to ace that interview?
Yeah, so I think my top tip is basically for job applicants. When you go for an interview, the one thing you should remember is there are 2 conversations or 2 sides to the conversation, which regardless of the question that is asked, the key thing is, on one hand, what can you do for us? On the other hand, what can we do for you? Now, what tends to happen sometimes is in the interview, candidates tend to focus a lot on the what can you do for me, right? And they kind of talk about a lot of so the popular question is, why do you want to work in, XYZ company? Well, because you're the best company in the world, you have achieved XYZ, you have the best people, and you make everything shine. And then I'm sitting on the other side going, okay, so it's great that you know about everything we do, but then why should I hire you when you may come in and kind of make us stop making things shine, right? So I think the tip is that when candidates go for interviews, you should always focus on telling the employer how you can add value. So it's always a value add conversation, because I think on one hand, the employer also wants to hire, I think generally speaking, wants to hire someone that on the primary note is that can do the job, right? That the person can do the job, can add value to the organization. But on the other hand, they want to hire someone that is passionate about the job because of what the employer can do for the candidate. So an example would be, you apply for a job as a real estate person, right? Now, the job is, why do you want to work for us? On one hand, what I would advise is that the candidate tries to show how, whether it's their experience, whether it's their competencies, can add value to that company, by going, oh, I want to work here because I feel I can add in the following ways. I can do this, and I feel my skill set would complement the good work that you do, right? So that's like already selling yourself to kind of go, this is why you should take me, because I can do this for you. And then you can then follow that up, which is this is the genuine side of the argument, is if someone shows up and is saying, this can make everything better, that's a red flag for me as an employer, because you're not telling me the downside of that conversation or what I have to give, because it's an equivalent exchange. You have to take something from it. You can follow up that and go, oh, and I also feel, this is where I can, whether your aspiration is to develop or to get better or to be mentored and stuff. So it's okay to say you want something from the employer, but you have to preface that by showing what you can add. Because if you don't show that, then there's no win for the employer. It's only a win for one person. I'm a big fan of the win-win argument to do the same. But I think it's just, well, it's not common because common knowledge is not common really. But you want to make sure that you put the employer's needs first. Just like if you were in customer service, you want to put the customer's needs first. Even though you still want the customer to buy from you, but you want to put their needs first. If you're selling a pen, you want to say, okay, this is why you should buy this pen, because your pen would do this for you. At the end of the day, you're still going to pay me, but you want to do that. So that's my best tip, is that you do that. You put the employer's needs first. How can you add value before you actually put your own need, like to follow that? The other is basically do your research. Like that's the minimum requirement any employer would ask you to do. Just do your research, whether it's by reading as simple as about us on their website, which kind of gives you a bit about, the background of the company. I've had people apply for a job. I remember someone applied for a job and we'd spoken to a point and the person then asked me, oh, and what is it that this role does? And I'm like scratching my head going, did I just speak to you for the last 20 minutes and you did not know what this role is about? But yeah, so I think that's like, do your research, whether it's to check their website, whether it's to, if you have people in your network that have worked in that company or work in the industry that company is in, do your research to find out from them. As simple, I think now you can just Google the company's name and you'd see if they've won awards or if they've been involved in a particular project. Like how amazing it would be for a salesperson to apply for a job with my organization and tell me, oh, yeah, I see that you guys have sold XYZ on plot 419 on 765. And I'm like, wow, this person has, this person is across the details and stuff. So I think that's the second tip there. Third tip, which is, it's quite normal, especially if you're not seasoned at interviewing, but it's very fine for you to pause in interviews. So you have times where people do interviews and they kind of, because they're so nervous, they try to like spit. It's almost like in hip hop, you're rapping and you're like stuff. And I'm like, they're going, right, how I did not get a single word you said, but thanks for coming. Either way, see you next time. And, so it's very fine for you to, during the interview, to kind of go, oh, would you mind if I just compose myself or thought about the question you asked? You can even ask for clarification about the question. Not too many times, but, if you didn't hear it correctly, ask for time, those techniques of just speaking, pace yourself, and of course, practice. I think people underestimate the value of practicing because generally the practice, if you take it seriously enough, the practice kind of makes you comfortable with conversations in a tense environment, because regardless of how happy the interviewer is, it's a tense environment regardless, because you want something. So I think just practicing and getting people to critique how you interviewed, whether it's amongst your friends or even people that are more experienced that have worked, to just, critique the way you interviewed and take that feedback is a positive one. And the last one that I would basically say with the interview is listen to the question. Now, I know there's a tendency, we've all done it, where we kind of Google all the possible questions in the world and go, my name, why are you here and things like that. But, the way interviews are currently, and lately I'm coming across very innovative way of interviewing. It never goes by a script. It's kind of like ballpark kind of questions. So you just have to almost keep an open mind to hear the question and kind of go, can I take a moment to consider what you've said, or can I clarify what you said and respond? Because most of the time, some people, it's almost like a loaded shotgun. It's like you ask them the question and they just fire out. Then you kind of go, that wasn't what I asked you about, but thanks for trying and stuff. So yeah, so I think that's my top tips.
Yeah. A lot of good, helpful tips there from the professionals. So yes, take note, guys. Speaking about practice, recently virtual interviews much more common than face-to-face interviews these days because of the pandemic and then moving forward from there. So how do you feel on sitting on the other side of the table as a HR manager? How do you feel about virtual interviews, and what preparation or practice the candidates, in this case more specifically international students or graduates, can do to help them prepare to ace these virtual interviews?
I think even though COVID's been pretty brutal, I suppose, globally, but I think the silver lining is that, there's so much technology now that's being, integrated into just the way we do things. And interviewing is one of those, areas as well. From my perspective, interviewing online or virtually actually makes it a lot easier from a candidate's perspective to interview. One of the things that people underestimate when they go for a face-to-face interview is from the moment you step into that building, the interview has started, like how you talk to the receptionist, because most of the time we end up going and go, oh yeah, how did you find that person and stuff like that? Were they nice or were they, stuff like that, right? But virtually that level of detail has actually gone out the window. So in a sense, the person, if a candidate is going for a virtual interview, they need to do the bare minimum, which is basically, have your background or whatever it is you're doing your interview, have that all sorted. Now, whether that is in the form of having a blurred screen like I am now, or if you don't want to have a blurred screen and you want to actually show your human self, at least get the whole, make sure it's clear and it looks neat and stuff like that. Because, people get distracted by where they're looking at. You need to practice eye contact because there's a tendency. So, and that's the thing, we're humans. And if I'm sitting in the same room with you, I'm taking in so much information. I'm taking in body language. Are you sweating? I'm taking in, are you looking at me in the eye? Are you, things like that. In a virtual context, I'm taking in where your eyes are actually looking at. So sometimes people could have, like sticky notes on their computers and down and, taking some tips from there. So it's very important that you identify where your camera is and have your camera looking at you in a way that whoever you're talking to can tell that you're either just looking at the screen or you're looking at the camera dead on, right? To kind of make sure that's happening. Some cases now, they even allow you to, you can, and that's why I said, it's okay for you to actually ask for clarifications. Like before you do the interview, you can go, oh, do you mind if I have a notepad with me so that I can actually write my thought down? Because in that case, you've kind of taken permission that if I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm doing this, right? And you've taken that doubt out of the way. Whereas if you don't say that and you just keep always looking away, then I'm like, is this person being distracted? Were they prepared for this interview and things like that? So I think the general interview etiquette still applies, right? You still dress correctly as usual, even though some people like to do the half interview scenario where the top is a suit and the bottom is something else, but you want to make sure you're presentable, test your camera, make sure it's actually working the right way, make sure the internet speed is appropriate. I think the the internet situation is the one that gets people stuck sometimes, where, if the internet speed is poor and it drops off, that's a nightmare scenario, which I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it does happen. So I think, just testing all these things out. If you have, a friend, call your friend, test with your friend, see that everything quality-wise works. And yeah, then you do your interview the normal way you would do a face-to-face interview. And and you have less things to worry about because you're in your comfort zone. You can have your glass of water with you. And that's why we say with interviews, especially the virtual one, before you start the interview, it's a good tip to tell your interviewer that, oh, I'm just going to have a bottle of water with me. I'm going to have a notepad with me, because that's like your cheat code, I would say, where if you're feeling the pressure, you can then go, oh, just going to take a sip of water, which is like, you can drag out that sip of water to like, relax yourself down. Or if they ask the question in a specific way, you go, oh, would you mind if I jot down what you just said so I can arrange my thought? And employers generally respect that you're, and it also proves that you're a competent user of technology, that it doesn't matter whether it's online or face-to-face. You know the proper etiquette, you ask for permission, you can communicate, you demonstrate that the interviewer's attention is very important to you. So that's why you have to, with technology, you have to take some of these good behaviors from a face-to-face scenario and do the same thing. Because people tend to think that because it's online, those things don't apply, but they actually still apply. And they're actually more visible in that sense, because the screen is all the information an employer has access to. So anything that goes on in that screen is you. That's the end of it, or the beginning of it. So that's my virtual interview tip.
Wow, amazing. And it's stuff that I guess we don't really think about. But even now, as we're recording, I'm staring at you guys on the screen, but I'm not looking at the camera, not making eye contact. No, amazing. So yeah, it's been such a wonderful chat, Paul. It's been, it's just incredible hearing your perspective on the HR side of everything and hearing about your PhD life. And I love seeing how passionate you are for the field. And I can't wait to see where you land in 5-10 years. So we'd hope to have you back on the show one day and see how far you've come.
Probably as a HR director at that time.
Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed. But yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me. And I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. And I think, with every episode and the angle of the subject matter that's being discussed, I think it, adds value to people. So yeah, thanks for doing what you do. And, one day I will hope to be back with something more insightful.
Absolutely. It's been our pleasure, talking to you today. So much wisdom shared, and I'm sure that our listeners will benefit from this talk a lot. So thanks for coming on, Paul. And we really hope that you come back one day, and we always, welcome you with open arms in our podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in. And if you like this episode, please do share around with your friends and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the Koala Club Podcast. Thanks, guys.